Coaching as Benevolence, a podcast for people who are curious about using coaching for self-development. I'm Eryn with Roots and Wings Grief and Loss Coaching.
And I'm L Shawn with Michelle Sage Place Positive Intelligence Coaching. Today we are moving on to the second section of our guided journal, Coaching Nuggets of Wisdom to Inspire, Explore, Act, Flourish, a guided journal to live your best life. We finished Inspire last episode, and now we're moving on to Explore. So Explore has a subtitle. It's Learn About Your Way of Being. So this is something to keep in mind as we go through these prompts in this section. Learn about your way of being. And we begin with the first prompt, and I'm going to read it. The shifting natural seasons can symbolize the human experience. With each season comes hopes and challenges, gifts and hardships. Reflecting on each of the 4 seasons may be a helpful exercise for better understanding yourself and your relationship to the world around you. In winter, what gifts do you notice? Maybe it is the silence from a fresh blanket of snow or the thrill of a winter sport. What about spring? What new beginnings and hope do you notice? For summer, the cadence of the days seems to shift as much of the world brightens with light into the evening. What do you observe on summer evenings, and how does that relate to your own growth? And finally, fall, the space of heightened color and letting go. What gifts do you notice with each of the seasons? With this prompt, it brings me to the episodes where we would review the seasons or we would go over the seasons. And I'm sure this is why we have this prompt. And it's interesting that this prompt should be our first prompt, and also that this should be related to Explore, which is learning about your way of being and thinking about how seasons can reflect our growth. They can reflect what we enjoy. It can reflect our challenges, our hopes. This is a great exercise to notice what comes up for you as you survey or review the different seasons. Right now, in Colorado, in the Northern Hemisphere, we are in spring. And it's May, and we just had Mother's Day weekend. And this is a time right now in Colorado of graduations, continuation ceremonies, endings. It's really the time of endings, of reflecting, of looking at how far you have come in your education journey, if you're graduating, or if you have children who are graduating. It is a time to think about and to celebrate how far you've come. And it's also a time of new beginnings, because I was in Estes Park this last weekend, and Estes Park is a mountain town. And there were so many elk out in the fields. And as you're driving along, there's just like herds of elk, and they're in various stages of life. Most of them are like in their teen years, like adolescent elk. You know, they have the bucks with their horns, they still have the fur on them, and you know, they're playing, and they're enjoying their time in the fields. And it reminded me of, you know, new beginnings and also birth, because a lot of the animals they have their young from the spring, and also bears are coming out of hibernation, and things are waking up. Animals and plants seem to be waking up. You've got all these leaves and flowers, and it's just a beautiful time of year. And so if I were to take that to myself and I look at the current season that we're in, which is spring, I'm wondering, what are things that are being born in me right now? What are some possibilities, new beginnings, and what's ending in my life? What am I graduating from? And there, I'm in a interesting time of my career, phase of my career, where I'm moving from one role into another. And I'm finding that there are so many things that shift gradually in this change of roles, not only in what's expected of me, but also what I'm seeing, what I'm processing, how I make decisions, and then also how I interact with, my colleagues, and how I interact with the board members, and how I interact with my mom, who's the founder and former executive director. That is really interesting to see how that is shifting and changing. And I would say that I am entering into a spring season of my career, which is really interesting. And what am I learning about that? Well, lots of new beginnings. And I think about, like a fawn going back to elk. I know that's deer, but going back to like that type of animal. You know how when a fawn is born, their legs are kind of like rubber, and they have to kind of get used to walking on their leg. And after a while, they become less awkward, and then they are able to, gallop along and enjoy their time, and it's no longer awkward. So that I kind of feel like that's where I am right now. My legs are still kind of rubbery. I'm still kind of figuring it out, but I feel like I'm capable because, a fawn is capable of walking if they don't have any deformities or injuries. So I'm capable. It's just going to take some time and some getting used to. Eryn, what's coming up for you?
So, a few things that you have said throughout, I took a few quick notes on because I think they really highlight what this is trying to reveal regarding how we explore our own way of being in the world. And when we're exploring our way of being, that's really getting to the nuance of how do we show up? Who are we? What is our internal dialogue? Those types of things. So, one of the things you said with spring right now, it's a waking up, right? Waking up. And I love that language, waking up, because it made me think that this journal prompt is a way to help people wake up to what's stirring inside of them, but also to wake up to maybe perspective shifting or new ways of being. I love that this concept of this, exploration in the seasons is the first prompt in the exploration section of the journal, because it really does make a lot of sense to have this level of imagery to show how we can learn about our own way of being in the world. So that showed up for me. And then you mentioned how in your transition in the work you're making decisions and how you feel capable. And even though you're still kind of like this fawn, there's this kind of curiosity or levity in this feeling that I got from you when you were talking about feeling capable. And when that phrase itself also stuck out to me, because when we feel capable, we are in our light. We are embodying the way of being that suits us and is how we are meant to show up in the world. So that really resonated with me a lot. And then this idea of using the seasons to evoke imagery regarding how we explore our own way of being, I think is just so beautiful. And I think this prompt is actually really beautifully written. And when you were reading it, I was so excited in terms of just like how I was feeling as I was listening to you read this prompt and the beauty within it and that it holds. And then I know in our podcast, we have talked about seasons. There was one season where we talked about it quite a bit, I think. And then in the recap, it came up a lot, like seasons in life, seasons in weather. It's then breaking that down to even more less obvious seasons. And you were very self-aware and were able to articulate when you're talking about this, that you are in your spring season in a way. And I think that would be another way to take this prompt and journal about it. Okay, now that you know what season you are in, how does that affect your way of being? how are you showing up in that space? What's, most life-giving to you there? So that really stood out to me as well. And I always like fall personally, as I was listening to this, just not even thinking about it as imagery or like a metaphor or anything like that. I was just like, you know what? I've always liked fall, but this year it feels a little bit different with spring. I think it's the first year in a long time where I have really liked the spring colors and the vibrancy that spring can bring. And maybe it's just because we've had spring forever now. We didn't get much of a winter. It really also helps me remember the one winter we got, which was last week, right? The major snowfall that we had here in Colorado and here in Longmont, Boulder County. And I think the snow was at our house up to about 8 inches. And my husband and my first grader, Brielle, were able to make a snowman out of that snowstorm that was as tall as me, if not a little bit taller once they put on leaves for hair and all of that. But what was so interesting about this is it felt so in place in the moment. But by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, this snowman was out of place. Snow person, whatever, right? Barely standing, and like hardly any snow is around it anymore because it had already melted. Like it melts so quickly in these summer or these spring snows that we get late in the spring season. And so by the time my daughter got back from school, she was saddened to see that the snowman was only one part of the remaining first snowball on the ground. So, and so it made me think of seasons as well, because there's obscurity in seasons and fitting in and not fitting in the seasons of life we're in. And through all of that, we get to consider what our way of being is with that, and how we can not only show up how we truly intend to, but also live out our way of being. So, and I see you do that so much, L Shawn, with your acts of service and the way you relate to your kids and all of those things, right? Like I see that as all the seasons, but in particular, you're showing up in those spaces as you've gone through this spring transition and doing it with your way of being that is so impactful to people around you. It's such it's if anybody's been around L Shawn in person, you're just like, this is so uplifting. Or also insightful too, right? And pensive and curious. And so I think that way of being doesn't go away with the shifting seasons.
Well, I appreciate that. Very kind of you to say. While you were talking, the thing that really came up for me was the emotions and also the ways of being that come with the season of spring, like curiosity, the levity, I know that this is the explore section, but the exploration, the curiosity, the experimenting with different ways of looking at things, perspectives was another thing that you mentioned as well. So that's something that really stuck out for me, was the idea of associating emotions or associating ways of being with the seasons. Really like that you were doing that there. And one thing that I would say about one of the emotions or ways of beings that I associate with spring is that kind of childlike wonder that comes with spring and things kind of, coming to life, and like you had said before, what I said before was a waking up, the springing forward, that like spring, spring is it's in the season, the idea of things popping out and the gradual change of spring. And I agree with you there about the long spring that we've had in Colorado. We did not really have a winter. It was very unusual season for us. We didn't have a lot of snowfall, and then last week we had that huge storm where you had 8 inches. I think there was like maybe 5 or 6 inches where I was. It's so interesting that in one town the amount of snow can be so different. And then also just driving along and seeing everything covered in snow, but then those trees that have just gotten their leaves getting weighed down by the heavy spring snow and the branches breaking, because at some point, that you reach a limit and then the branches are not able to hold the weight and they break. And a lot of those branches are new. Some of them maybe even might have some kind of disease or something. And so those branches are going to break. That was really interesting about the spring snow last week. It's not unusual in Colorado to have spring snow at this time of year. We usually have snow in March. We didn't have any snow in March, I don't think. It has been a very strange season, and that brings me back to the unpredictability of seasons as well, because especially in Colorado, where we do have 4 seasons, but our seasons are short, the warmer seasons, I would say, like spring and fall are shorter than winter and summer, which are the more extremes. We have shorter seasons, and we have a saying in Colorado where you can wait 5 minutes if you don't like the weather. And so there's the unpredictability of seasons, and that it's not like a perfect transition from one season to the next, not in Colorado anyway. That wasn't the case in Japan. However, when I was in Japan, the seasons were very distinct. Like you got 3 months of winter and 3 months of spring, 3 months of summer and 3 months of fall. It was pretty pronounced. And you could even plan your schedule around it. On the day in your calendar, you know that from like middle of June through July, it's going to be the rainy season. And they have this whole thing where they put their clothes away for the different seasons at a certain time in the calendar. So that's how predictable the seasons are in Japan. In Colorado, not so much. That brings me to how seasons in your life can show up in unexpected ways. For example, let's take relationships, for example. I'm thinking about relationships, the seasons of relationships, and I'm thinking you could be in a summer season of your relationship of like 10, 20 years. Like, let's say you fall in love again, or let's say you had like a winter season in your relationship where maybe you didn't feel we're talking romantic relationships here, where you're not feeling so close. And then something happens where you find each other again. And then it's like spring in your relationship, and then summer, and then it kind of calms down again. But you have these seasons throughout your relationship, depending on if it's a long-term relationship or if you like think about relationships at the beginning, like you have these spring-like experiences where you're getting to know each other, where you're awkward, where you have little tips about things, where you're learning your boundaries and you're learning about each other. And then as you go into summer, it's like such a wonderful part of your relationship where you've gotten into a routine. And as you reach your fall, the season after summer where things are not so hot, that you're now maybe been together for 6, 7 months and you're starting to feel really comfortable with each other. It's really cozy and nice. And then you start getting ready. Maybe you move in together. And so that's like your winter of your relationship where things are just, steady, and maybe there's things that are developing in the winter of your relationship. You're reaching your year anniversary, and maybe you're thinking, hey, maybe it's time for us to think about taking it to the next level. So there's all these things that happen in a relationship, in a career, as in with mine. Like I'm sure that even though I'm in my spring right now, that there will come a time when I'll be in my winter of my career. I wonder what that will look like. I don't know because I haven't been there yet. So I'm just thinking how that would look and what are some of the emotions that come with that. So those are some things that are coming up for me. How about you, Eryn?
Yeah, I felt a sense of exploration there. And I think that that is so invaluable to recognize with this journal prompt, to go back to exploring your way of being to increase your self awareness, because you may have a winter season right now that's maybe especially difficult or not, depending on your views on winter. And you'll have a spring that might be great, but then something will happen in summer. Like that is all outside of one sphere of influence. On the other end of it, it's what is my way of being through all of this? And it doesn't mean I have to show up in a monotonous way or show up the same way. I think it's more about taking the time to understand and have the self awareness of where our wellness is best suited, how we get that and incorporate it into our lives on a day-to-day basis, and how we can live out our authenticity as well. And I think that is challenging because there are those external factors of the shifting seasons and relationships and things outside of what's going on for us internally. But I think when we can align our understanding of how we are moving through something, whether that is a fall season or a spring season, I think that could be really helpful. And so I really would love to hear like from listeners too on how they are journaling about this prompt and what they're starting to recognize. Because I think even for me personally, I think I mentioned it like fall, but then spring's been good, right? Like that doesn't matter as much as here's how I show up in fall. Here's how I show up in spring. I think that's a good way to shift the question to explore oneself in this journal prompt. And so I do think, though, on the other end of that, the imagery taken from each of the seasons can be a beautiful way to better understand ourselves. And I love how you were talking about Japan having 3 months of each season and it being predictable. And here it's not even predictable in a day. Like if you have kids in Colorado, you send them to school with a winter coat, a rain jacket, shorts, a t-shirt. Like, I mean, they could go to them. It could be snowing in the morning, afternoon, bright, sunny, 70 degrees. Right? Like, and I just want to make a note just to call out Colorado for this or like where we live. But my brother was visiting and we went to pick up my kids after school. Was this in January, maybe in January or early February? And all these first graders are running out of the classroom in shorts. And he's from Kansas. He lives in Kansas. And he was just so taken aback by that. He's like, well, I guess you know you're a Colorado kid if you're wearing shorts in the winter. It was just so funny because he was like, wait, what is it? It felt so obscure to him. And I think that like our place can feel so obscure to us. And it can be really hard to make sense and make meaning of things, right? And that's I think that imagery of the seasons could be a helpful way to do that and really understand like, okay, so why do I like fall? And how does that show up for me in my way of being? Oh, I am sensory. I like smells and colors and scents and certain things that come up in fall. So, why is that and how is that embodied for myself and my way of being? Or maybe I like temperate temperatures. Does that mean that I like things to be pretty temperate in life? Or do I like spiciness throughout the seasons? And do I want the thrill of extremes or differences? I love that's about coaching because when you start to get into the process, we start asking these questions. Just like I was asking those questions about those things that help our clients better understand themselves, understand their wants and needs, but also understand that in relationship to the place and context they're situated within. And I think that's what coaching does a little bit more overtly, right? It does the external, internal counseling in some ways, yes, but more internal, right? So I just think that that's what makes coaching feel so creative to me and so accessible to me because we can have these conversations about imagery and the seasons and see where that takes us. And there's an opportunity for us to shift perspective throughout all of that in a way that feels maybe a little bit more light, maybe, or a little bit, I don't know, a little bit responsive. And I really like that about coaching. And I think that coaching may not have a reputation that highlights that creative process enough. And I really value that in the coaching that I do with my clients, but also when I'm getting help through coaching and then also through this prompt, I see it in so many ways. And even the questions here, I want to shift to the questions of, this question about winter, right? Maybe it is the silence of a fresh blanket of snow or the thrill of a winter sport. Those two things are quite different. Fresh blanket of snow and the calm and peace that might evoke, and then a thrill of a winter sport like downhill skiing and hockey and all those things. So I love the imagery that's included in this prompt. But yeah, any of the questions stand out to you, LaShawn, or anything else that you're really feeling right now?
I do like the differences there with the silence and the thrill. I like that those two things can exist in winter. I often associate winter with silence with reflection, with hibernating, with, slowing down, with staying indoors. And when you were saying that about the thrill of a winter sport, I'm like, that is so outside of the scope of my experience. I do not associate winter with getting out and enjoying myself and doing thrilling things. Yet there are other people who might see that as winter is a time of exploring, a time of play, a time of getting out in nature, having fun. And so that is something that I don't associate with winter. However, when I think about it more deeply, I think, well, then there's Christmas and there's other things in winter which have that same effect for me, like in terms of being like childlike and curious and playful, that can be seen in the holidays that happen in winter. And yet I wouldn't really associate winter with sports. And so it leads me to think about what would it be like if I were the type of person who associated winter with sports. So that kind of gets me out of a comfort zone in terms of my experience and imagining. And that goes back to the whole coaching, the imaginative nature of coaching and the creative nature of coaching, where you can step out of your familiar surroundings and step into something not so familiar. For example, I could start thinking about, my brother-in-law and his family. They go skiing every winter, and that is a part of their experience in winter, is that they have a pass and they go and they ski and snowboard and they do all kinds of things in winter. And for me, winter is a time of hibernation and slowing down and, being cozy and drinking nice warm beverages and, eating comfort food. So what if, and this is another really fun thing to do, what if another person sees summer that way? To me, that's like, it's like, me, seriously? Okay, I want to know more about that because
No, just as
I
you were thinking, I was like, I think out of all of those, summer might be my slowing down.
down.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know, and you did say that you tend to do your like kind of reflection and goal setting in August, which to me is so strange because I usually consider December the time to do that, to look back at the year and, see, did I accomplish my goals? But then I was thinking, maybe doing it in August is good because then it's kind of not, it's a little over halfway there. Maybe doing it in June is better because then you can look back and see how far you've come and like how on track are you to your goals that you set in December or January. And then what can you do differently? Whereas if you look at in my case, like if I look at December and I'm like, okay, well, this year wasn't so productive. What am I going to do next year? I think I would feel better about the year if I do a little inventory at the middle of the year and kind of give myself that chance to reflect and grow and make the second part of the year align it more to what I want it to be. So that's something I thought about. But I really am interested in what you said about summer being kind of a slowing down time. Can you say more about that?
Well, I think with my work, I purposely cut off a lot of the extras that I typically do during the winter and fall to have time and space with my kids in some ways, like to be able to just like have a little bit of a slower time. And I was also thinking this might be tied to two things. One, I used to be a teacher. So I'm used to that rhythm. And
Yeah.
then growing up, I played basketball, I was student council president, I played band, I did all these things. And when were they taking place? Late fall through winter into early spring. So it's interesting when I say that out loud because that's when I try to pack in as much of my work as possible as an adult. And I'm like, whoa, do I need to like revisit that with my own way of being? Am I trying to hang on to my high school self for some reason, and in terms of how I do things? So yeah, that's kind of how this has shaped up in my cadence of how I spread out my time. But I think what is interesting for both of us is the recognition that we need time and space and downtime. It can't be 24/7 all year long. Like there has to be a little bit of give. And I like that that happens in different ways for different people. So yeah, going back to you with your downtime, or I don't know, like why for you is it winter?
I think it's because I don't like the cold. And so I like to stay indoors. And I find myself doing more reflective, contemplative things in winter because I want to stay away from the cold. And for me, snow in itself and like the cold is a slowing down kind of temperature. I don't imagine things being really high paced or fast, sorry, fast paced in the winter because of that. But then when I think about it and I think about like what my schedule looks like in, like you were saying, in the fall and winter months, that's when things really start revving up. And so it's really interesting. It's a very strange juxtaposition between the really busy time that it is for me when it's winter and my like psychologically I feel like that's the time to slow down and be contemplative and reflective and just have days where you're not doing anything. Whereas in the summer, I feel like that's a time where temperatures are high and people are out doing things. Plus, I also have a background in education as well, so that to me is a time when there's a break from working, and that's a time to see friends and to be out because it's warm and it's easier to get around when it's warm. So that is how I feel about it psychologically. But when I really think about it logically, fall and winter are probably some of the busiest seasons for me, just career wise and life, events wise. There's so much that goes on, like in the fall
Yeah.
and the winter, like with holidays and with school revving up. It's by September the kids have been in school for several weeks, and things are really starting to ramp up a little. So it's interesting
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
what that reveals.
It's making me think of like how our way of being may be a mismatch with our environment. And I think that's a fun prompt to explore in this to see where there is consternation and just being radically honest with oneself. Like, oh, I'm a very soft-hearted person, but I'm in an environment that has a lot of mean-spirited people. Is it only about my way of being, or is it also about finding other people, or all those other things too? So I think that when you can kind of take a look at seeing some of those mismatches of way of being, place and time, environment, and right, even place and time. I've met people and they'll be like, I swear I was born in the 1800s. Like that's where I belong. Or I really think that I belong in the future. So, like there is that level of, okay, knowing when we're out of place, how do we anchor into ourselves, believe in ourselves, and love all the quirkiness of our qualities that may not fit the space, but are true to who we are. And that's hard to do. But it's also worth it. It's worth choosing yourself in that way, right? Like,
I love that you brought up what that could reveal is not fitting in with your environment or your surroundings. And I hadn't thought about that before. It's an interesting perspective and it reveals a lot about my way of being and one's way of being, how our environment shapes us, and also how our environment can also be a source of like contrast. So for me, in my current career, fall and winter are like really busy time, but my natural rhythm is one where I slow down and I want to just be more reflective and not so pressured to get things done. But and so I and that really reveals also why it's been a challenge for me in those months to align with the reality of what's expected of me in those months and the reality of what I want and what I expect for those months, like a slowing down and a rest, a time of rest. And it's not, it doesn't agree with what is needed. So the what is needed is that I need to be more active during the fall and winter months. And so it's almost like not a contradiction, it's a conflict between what is expected of me or what is required of me in this career and in this environment and what's expected and what I want and what is comfortable for me and what is aligned with my well-being. And then here's a question that is like a coaching question. How can I align with my well-being, and how do I reconcile that? How do I reconcile the way things are and the way things that I would like them to be, or the way that it feels like natural and comfortable for me? And then there's also the question of, is that discomfort an indication of growth, or is that an indication of like a contradiction? Maybe this isn't the right fit for me, that kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I love that
So
question.
there's so much there, that is revealed in just that, my own natural inclination to want to rest and take things slowly in the fall and winter months. And then there's the reality of what is expected of me in the fall and winter months, which is to, really be more focused and so many things are happening in those months that it's so important to have high energy levels. My energy levels need to match what is expected, and yet naturally I have an inclination to have lower energy levels during those times. So yeah, that's a question that I would love to explore in this prompt.
Yes, I love that that's where you ended up here, because I think it's a good example of what it means to sit with the prompt and fully explore it and spend some time. And I mentioned this in the last episode when LaShawn had a question to like list some things about gratitude, and I tried it. And I think you said list 5 or 10. And
Yeah.
at first I had a hard time listing like two, but within a few minutes it was down to 31. And I was like, oh my goodness, I just sometimes need to sit with these prompts more, because I've tried journaling in various aspects. I'm not much of a journaler. I'd rather write about other people. No, no, just kidding. But yeah, so just realizing there might be a strategy to effective journaling, having a good, rich prompt, sitting with that prompt and taking the time to slow down and start writing a sentence. It doesn't have to be anything at all, and then keep moving on from there. So I guess that'll be my call to action today. This prompt has so much imagery, so much richness with it. I encourage listeners to go through the prompt slowly and spend time with it and revisit what you want to as you learn more about the seasons and your way of being and how they relate.
That's a great call to action, and it has so many layers to it. I'm trying to see where my call to action will fit, but one thing that I have really benefited from this conversation is hearing, Eryn, your responses. So I want to encourage our listeners to have this conversation, take it out of the prompt, even like share the prompt with a loved one, someone that a trusted friend, and have this conversation, because you can learn about that person. I've learned so much about you, Eryn, in talking about seasons and how you show up in the seasons and what they mean to you. And it's a great opportunity to hear other perspectives and how other people show up in the different seasons. So my call to action to our listeners is have a conversation using this prompt. See what happens. Thanks for joining us for Coaching as Benevolence. I'm LaShawn with Mayshell Sage Place, Positive Intelligence Coaching.
And I'm Eryn with Roots and Wings, Grief and Loss Coaching.
Have a benevolent day.